welcome back to CQC Solutions. Today we are going to have a quick look at the interview process for becoming a CQC registered manager. This is one of the most common questions that I've been getting asked and people have typically been looking for support on, so I thought it would be worthwhile doing a quick video. We're going to go through some of the key areas, some of the things you need to think about. I'm going to give some example questions and also some tips when thinking about preparing for those questions. Now, it isn't going to be exhaustive, you still have to do a little bit of homework, but hopefully we're going to point you in the right direction, and we're going to make you feel a little bit more confident about what it is you need to do. So let's dive right in. So the CQC interview for registered manager, basically the interview process to become a registered manager basically involves an in-depth assessment of your knowledge by a CQC inspector. So they're going to be looking at your knowledge, your skills, and also have a look at your leadership in terms of delivering quality care that complies with CQC regulations. The interview typically will explore your understanding of some of the legal frameworks, your ability to lead and manage a care service, and how you ensure high standards of care. The structure for the interview, it's as I've said, it's designed to assess whether you are a fit and proper person under the regulations, and that you understand and can implement the key themes from CQC, which are safe, caring, responsive, effective, and well led. I use the acronym SCREW because it fits in my head and it sticks there. You use whatever it takes to make sure that it sticks in your head as well. The interview itself typically can take place in person. It can take place virtually. It very much depends on the circumstances and time constraints of each inspector, whether they're actually based locally or not. So be prepared for either or. If it's via video, you've got notes right in front of you, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, one of the key tips that I can give you before we even start is when you attend the interview, is just relax and be yourself. Don't try and hide anything. Be honest, be transparent, be open. If you don't understand questions or you're not sure on how to answer them, please ensure that you are having that discussion with the inspector at the time. They're looking for you to be honest. They're not looking to trip you up. I've done this many times. I've had many interviews to become a registered manager, and believe me, they certainly are not looking to trip you up. They want to get you through that process. They want to support you in becoming an effective registered manager. So please be honest, be upfront, and be who you are. So the interview itself, I'm going to give you a few example questions under each of the headings that they might explore it. As I've said, the questions that I'm going to give aren't exhaustive. They may typically have other questions or they may frame them slightly differently. So please do your homework. And one of the first things you can do is go onto the CQC website, look at the 5 key themes, what comes in each of those key themes, have a look at the regulations as well. You need to make sure that you have an awareness and you at least have an understanding, or at the very least know how to get this information and understand it in terms of the service that you're actually running. Now we'll go into some of those key areas near the end of the video, and we'll go through the regulations and we'll explore CQC's website a little bit more. But for now, we're going to dive into what some of the questions may well be, and we'll give you some tips for preparing for some of those questions as well. So one of the areas that they're going to look at is understanding CQC's fundamental standards. And as we've said, they're safe, caring, responsive, effective, well led. So they're going to ask you what they are. Whether they ask you outright in one question just to say, tell me what these standards are, it might just be something that crops up and they get you to state them as you go under each of the headings. So be prepared for that. It might just be one question where you're saying exactly what they are, or it might be something that crops up along the way and you have to go through them individually. So be prepared for those. And as I've said, go through the CQC website and have a look. They may well also ask you about how you ensure that the service meets the fundamental standards of care. So how do you ensure that your service is safe, it's caring, responsive, it's effective, and it's well led? How do you do each of those areas? Now, you just want to be having to think about what those fundamental standards are. also how you comply with the regulated activities and regulations. And again, we're going to go through those later on in the video as well, so you can have a look at them, you can explore them yourself. But basically, it's typically asking you to understand what the regulations are. And by this point, hopefully, you will at least have an awareness of what the regulations are. But don't worry, as I've said, we'll go through them again later in the video. One of the questions that I have always been asked, and it is around person-centred care. Now, whether you call that person-centred approaches, person-centred care, person-led, however it's framed, they are typically going to ask you some questions around this. Sometimes it's just as outright as, how do you ensure that the care and support you provide is person-centred? It can sometimes be as simple as that. It might be asking you to explain what person-centred mean. It may ask you to give some examples of how you believe you are person-centred, things that you've done in your service, individuals that you've supported, and what the outcomes may well be. So just have a think about some examples as well as your understanding of what person-centred or person-led actually is. They may well also ask you to explore how you ensure that dignity, privacy, and consent is always maintained within your service. So again, that might just be talking through what your understanding is, but it also might be asking specific examples as well. So within this, you want to be discussing your care plans, your care and support plans. You want to be discussing how you are tailoring them to the individual needs. And more importantly, you have outcomes attached to each of those support plans and the steps along the way to achieve those outcomes. So you want to make sure that you have that process laid out in front of you about how you do that. And also have a think about direct examples of how you have involved the individuals that you support, how you've involved the families, and how you have involved people in the decision-making process, in the writing of those support plans, and how you've been able to ensure that you have consent in terms of those support plans. And consent, you need to be having to think about, particularly people who may not be able to verbalise their consent. How do you understand whether a person's given consent? And do you regularly go back to check that as well? So it's not just something that happens once a year. You're constantly ensuring that that person consents to having this information, and it is representative of who they are, and it is what they want in their life, and it's what support they think they want and how they want that support to look as well. And you also want to be discussing that your support plans are fluid. They're not something, again, that just gets reviewed every 12 months. It's something that happens on an ongoing basis as the individual change, as the service changes, as the environment changes. So it's something that you want to be fluid throughout, and you need to make sure that you at least have some understanding of that, and you have some examples and evidence of where you are doing that and how you are doing that. Undoubtedly, CQC are going to be talking about leadership and management. Again, a couple of questions they might ask you. How do you ensure that your staff are motivated? How do you ensure that they are well trained? And well trained doesn't just mean the banditry. Okay. They may well also ask about, how do you manage underperformance? Or how do you manage conflict within the team? And they undoubtedly are going to ask you for some examples of that. They may well ask you about examples of where you've had to deal with conflict. So how you dealt with it, what was the process, what was the outcome? And also how your service changed as a result of that conflict. Did you have to think and implement different ideas, different thoughts? So it's ultimately, it's looking at your learning from that conflict as well, and the team's learning, and how you disseminated that information across the team to make sure that everybody was aware and everybody bought into any changes that needed to be made. In terms of the training, they're going to ask you about what systems you've got in place for monitoring people's training. They're also going to be asking you about how you improve staff performance and their training. So basically make sure that you are having conversations around your own individual leadership style. So give that some thought before you go to the interview. What style, what type of leader are you? And how do you put that across? Does it work? Does it not work? Are there some changes that might need to be made? Are there things within your practice that you've reflected upon and you are attempting to change because of feedback, because of discussions that you've had with your team or with senior leadership? And again, that's about being honest and transparent. You need to be discussing about how you harness a learning focused environment, how you support people to develop and progress, utilising the different skill sets. And also just discuss how you monitor that and how you support that. And that can be many different guises, isn't it, in terms of whether you've got a training matrix, whether you have online systems that monitor that for you, but you still have to go in and have a check. And you will have some sort of plan in your head about how often you review your training, whether that's weekly, monthly, quarterly. Just make sure that you are having a think about how often you go in and you check that. So have a think about, again, your supervisions, your team meetings, your training sessions. And also when you're thinking about training, have a think about not just the mandatory training that is expected of each service, but also how do you tailor that training to the individuals that you support? What have you done that is additional, that is extra, that has ensured that you continue to excel in terms of meeting the fundamental standards, but also how you're thinking about the future and how you might progress in terms of the training for your team to make sure that you can take that next step into becoming a service of excellence. So really drill down on some of those and have a think about what you're going to do, how you're going to do, and why you're going to do. They are also going to be asking you about quality assurance and risk management. Again, a couple of questions they might ask you. How do you monitor the quality of care within your service? Can you provide examples of where there has been a significant risk in your service? What was it? What process did you go through? What was the outcome? And what changed? What did you need to do to mitigate those risks? And how did you disseminate that information across the team to make sure everybody was on board? And did you involve the individuals that you support in understanding what those risks were and the steps that need to be taken to overcome some of those risks? It may well also ask you about how you prevent incidents. Now, we all know that there are incidents that will happen. We work with people, we support people. So things are going to happen, things are going to go wrong. So what immediate steps are you taking to prevent incidents, particularly incidents around medication errors or falls? What was your process for this? So again, be prepared to discuss your audits, what type of audits you have in place, whether that is your monthly audit, quarterly audit, annual audit, whether that's your manager's weekly walk around, whether it's your medication audits, how often are you doing them? What are the outcomes for them? Have you found anything? Also, they will be asking you about how you learn from feedback and complaints and how you manage that feedback. What systems have you got in place for feedback? For example, your surveys, your one-to-one meetings, etc. And explain how you implement risk assessments and manage health and safety across the board. So again, those are the areas that you need to delve into, have a little bit more think about and how they are applicable to your service. So it's not a one size fits all, it's something that you're going to have to put some thought into about what it is you actually do. But again, they're not looking to trip you up. There have been some instances, because we are human, where people have not quite hit the mark when CQC have asked the question, and CQC have given them some support and they've guided them in what might need to change, and they've given some tips and they've given some help. So again, that's where the honesty and the transparency comes in place, and where CQC will come forward and will help you. Undoubtedly, CQC are going to ask you about safeguarding and protection of people. These could be, how do you ensure safeguarding procedures are followed in your service? What monitoring do you have in place for safeguarding? How do you follow through on any safeguarding issues? How do you follow through on the monitoring of things aren't quite going right? Can you give examples of safeguarding issues that you've encountered? How you resolved those issues? What action you took? Including your lessons learned and how learning again was disseminated across the team. They will undoubtedly be asking you about how do you ensure that your team are trained and supported in safeguarding. They will ask you about the different levels and how often, and how do you assess the ongoing knowledge of safeguarding across the team. So here you need to be thinking about how you demonstrate a strong understanding of safeguarding policies, including how you report and protect vulnerable people. How do you work alongside your external partners? So the likes of other agencies, local authorities, what's their reporting mechanism? How do you report through to safeguarding boards? What action do you take in the interim whilst you're waiting for, I don't know, you may be waiting for a panel meeting to go ahead, but what are you going to put in place in the interim? How do you do that? What's your thought process? And also have a think about how you ensure your staff are compliant in safeguarding. Okay, so again, this might be your supervisions, it might be your team meetings. It's all about how you evidence that. And it's the age-old adage about if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So you need to make sure that you are consistent in recording that and making sure that you have the signatures of team members to say that they have understood and they've attended and they are aware of what their responsibilities are under that. They may well also ask you about handling complaints and around continuous improvement. So there may be questions around how you handle complaints to ensure that they lead to service improvement. Can you give examples where feedback or a complaint has led to a change in your service, and what change did that look like? Were there any barriers to that change? If so, how did you overcome them? And would you do it differently next time? So they're looking for some reflective practice here. Okay, so it's not just about describing what you've done. They're actually showing, or they want you to show that you have learned from this process. So they're asking you to reflect upon yourself. So you want to be emphasising the importance of listening to the feedback and being transparent in handling complaints, so people actually understand the process that you've gone through when you are investigating those complaints. You want to be sharing some specific examples where feedback has helped improve standards. Have a think about how and why it has improved those standards. And how do you then monitor the ongoing effectiveness? So you don't just sit back and rest on your laurels. You've made those changes, you've implemented those changes. How do you monitor that those changes are still effective and that you're going to continue to move forward? They may well be asking you around regulatory compliance and inspections. So simple questions such as, how do you prepare for a CQC inspection? How do you ensure ongoing compliance with CQC regulations? How do you respond to any compliance issues identified with CQC? So this is where you're going to be looking at your processes for staying updated with any regulatory changes. Again, you want to be discussing your audits. What level are those audits? How often are you undertaking them? And how are the outcomes of the audits actioned? And again, how are they disseminated across the team to make sure that everybody learns and everybody is on board with any changes or any actions that need to take place because of the outcomes from an audit. You need to be discussing how you will handle inspection findings. So you're going to be developing improvement plans. You're going to be developing action plans. And this is about taking a holistic approach with team members and people you support. So it's not just about responding to things in isolation, it's about the service in its entirety and how the service responds and what impact that will have. Now, for some settings, they may well touch upon financial management. It depends where you're at, what responsibilities you've got. But if you do find yourself having some financial management, then again, you're going to need to have an overview of the regulations. So again, they may be asking people about financial viability, profit and loss, if indeed that is your responsibility. And how do you manage budgets to ensure that the spending aligns with service priorities? So basically, this is just about showing an understanding of financial management in care, including balancing quality care against cost. And how do you do that effectively to make sure that you are sustainable going into the future? So as I've said, those are some of the questions, those are some of the things that you need to be thinking about. So when you're preparing for a CQC interview, you want to have a look and research CQC guidelines. So you want to be going onto their website and you want to be looking at what the key areas are. You want to be understanding about how CQC are going to be gathering evidence. So we all know about the framework. How does my service fit into that? How is evidence going to be collected? How is it going to be collated? How am I going to forge a relationship with my CQC inspector? So make sure that you understand what those fundamental standards are. You want to know your service. You want to be ready to discuss specific policies that you have if they come up. You want to know what the procedures you've got in place. So you want to have knowledge of what these are. And again, if it's over video call, get them in front of you. Okay, nobody's expecting you to know and remember every detail about every single thing. But if you can pinpoint it when it's in a book in front of you and have that conversation, that's all the inspector's going to be looking for. Okay? Have real life examples in front of you. Where possible, provide those specific examples from your experience. And that's really, really important to think about here. We are talking about your direct experience. Now, what CQC are sometimes good at is they might ask you a question right at the start and they might come back to it at the end. Now, if you haven't used your own real life experience, you're going to have difficulty in going back to that and remembering what it was you said at the start. Because believe me, you're going to be slightly nervous and not everything's going to be sticking in your head. So be honest. Only use examples that are true to you. Okay? You need to demonstrate your understanding of the questions being asked in real life. The other key thing is every single question, you have to remain person-centered. So think about the language that you're using. Focus on your actions. Ensure that every action or every conversation that you're having is about the well-being of the people that you support. That's where you always want to come back to with each of your questions. It's about being person-centered in every single aspect of your approach. So whether that's about finances, whether it's about safeguarding, whether it's about the fundamental standards themselves, you have to ensure that they are person-centered, because that is what you do. That's the essence of what you do, is ensuring that you are being person-centered, that you have quality outcomes for the individual that you support. So make sure that that's happening all the time. Hopefully this has been helpful in some way. If there's anything else that you think you want to know or you think that I've missed out in this video, then please get in touch via the website at www.colopiasolutions.co.uk and I will attempt to do another video, or we can have a conversation on a one-to-one and I can go through in a little bit more detail about how you prepare for the CQC Registered Manager interview. So, as always, thank you for watching, and until next time, take care. Hello and welcome to the second installment in this video where we are discussing the CQC interview to become a registered manager. Now, as promised, we're going to take a very quick look through the regulations for CQC. And to do this, we are going to jump over to the CQC website. And the first regulation that we want to have a look at, which we've highlighted in the original video, is Regulation 9, Person-Centred Care. And it's basically, as we discussed, that you must make sure that you take into account people's capacity and ability to consent, and also that you are undertaking your duties in a lawful manner whilst acting on their behalf. You must also ensure that you are planning alongside the person, making sure, if appropriate, that you have an advocate or you have family members involved to act on that person's behalf if that is deemed appropriate. And within this section, you also need to be having to think about the Mental Capacity Act of 2005, which, as I've said, includes the duty to consult others, such as carers, family members, advocates, where appropriate. If we skip back, we're going to go to Regulation 9A. As you can see, this regulated activity relates to visiting people, and it's making sure that people can receive visits when they want. Now, people aren't to be discouraged from having visitors. They aren't to be discouraged from having people into their home when they choose. I am aware some care homes do have set times, which makes things easier, or asks people not to visit during peak times, for instance during meal times. But you need to give this some careful consideration as to whether this is appropriate or whether it's actually impinging upon the individual's rights, but more importantly their human rights. So you need to make sure that the approach that you're taking is the right decision based upon the individual, and it takes into account all of the individuals living there. And again, it works within the Mental Capacity Act to make sure that when you are making these decisions, you are doing it alongside a representative, a carer, a family member, an advocate, if that is indeed appropriate for that person. So again, it's just one or two things to consider when you are making those decisions. We'll then jump on to Regulation 10, which is dignity and respect. So basically it does what it says on the tin, basically making sure that people who use services are treated with respect and dignity at all times. And you must also ensure that this is incorporated into your support plans. And again, this includes the consent, making sure that you have consent documented. You also have documented how that individual gives consent, whether it's verbally, whether it's body language, whether it's pictorial, whatever and however that individual chooses to communicate, you have taken that into account and you have ensured that that is within your support plans also. And that's also included within Regulation 11, which is the actual need for consent. And this consent covers all aspects of the individual's life, making sure that you are acting respectfully, you are acting lawfully, you are taking into account the regulations. And this is also, it's not just regards to the individual's life, it's in regards to nutrition and hydration. Person-centred care must be at the fore of absolutely everything. As we discussed in the last video, every single regulation, every area that you cover must be undertaken in a person-centred manner. So now we go on to Regulation 12, safe care and treatment. Again, it's to make sure that people are safe. It's as simple as that. It's to make sure that the care, support and treatment is provided in a way that prevents any avoidable harm or risk. And it's the key word there, that is avoidable. So it's making sure that you have your support plans, that you have your risk assessments, that you have trained staff, you have competency skills being undertaken, competency assessments being undertaken as people go, not just as a one-off, but make sure that you're repeating that as you go. Undoubtedly, there are going to be some risks when you are supporting individuals, but this is about demonstrating that you have taken all reasonable steps to avoid or indeed mitigate those risks. Regulation 14 is meeting nutritional and hydration needs. So again, very, very simple, but again, it has to be very, very individualised, and making sure that you have a support plan to cover this in place. So it's basically asking you to avoid or indeed reduce the risks of malnutrition and dehydration whilst that person is receiving any care or support from your service. Now that doesn't just mean for yourselves as a service provider, it means that you are ensuring that you are working with external providers such as SALT for assessments, and you're getting them to work alongside you, work alongside the individual, and where appropriate you are bringing in advocates or carers and relatives if again that is required. But more importantly, you have to be thinking about consent here, whether the person understands the risks, whether the person has any religious or cultural backgrounds that need to be taken into account. And again, all of that needs to be encompassed within a care and support plan. Regulation 15, premises and equipment. Basically making sure that you have a safe environment, making sure that your service is sustainable financially, making sure that you have legal responsibilities and you are meeting those legal responsibilities. You have contracts with external providers to make sure that you get supplies. So the likes of food, equipment, what have you, all of those things are in place to ensure that you can have continuity of service. And if there's any break in that continuity of service, how you plan to overcome that, and what have you got in place. And that kind of thing is usually within your business continuity plan. Regulation 16, which is receiving and acting on complaints. Again, we've touched on this within the first part of the video. More importantly, and there's more and more emphasis being placed on the fact that you need to evidence the process that you have gone through when dealing with complaints and when investigating complaints. So it's not good enough just to have the complaint come in and then you have an outcome and you give that outcome. They want to see the process that you've gone through so they can understand how you have reached that decision. Making sure that you are taking action where necessary, where failure may have occurred, where it might have been an issue because of a team member or because of an issue with the service, and making sure that that is actually actioned. And making sure that you are publishing those actions to the appropriate people as well. Regulation 17, good governance. So this is making sure that you have the right assessments, you are monitoring, you are driving an improvement on the quality and safety of the care and support that you are providing. You're ensuring that the systems and processes assess, monitor and mitigate any risks that you have. So again, where your risk assessments come in place. And it's making sure that you have the welfare of the individuals you're providing the services to at heart. And you must continually evaluate this, and you must also ensure that you are continuing to monitor this, to seek to improve. And I think, as we said in the first stage of the video, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So you can think that you've got all the greatest auditing practices, all the rest of it, but if you hadn't recorded your audits and the outcomes and the actions, then it absolutely means nothing. So it's making sure that you do indeed have the paper trail to meet that. Regulation 18, which is staffing. Again, we touched on this within the first part of the video. It's making sure that you have suitable numbers. So indeed you have the correct ratios. Now, a lot of those ratios for supported living, etc., will be determined by the community care assessment from the social worker. And then after a period of settling in, they may well review whether that individual's needs have changed. In terms of residential care homes for older persons, you need to have a good tool that you can use to assess the ratios. And you need to make sure that that actually is meeting the needs of not only the people that you support, but also meeting the needs of the team. You must also ensure that you've got training, you've got appropriate training for staff, and again, we've covered that. This is about not just the mandatory training, but how are you meeting individual needs and how are you progressing and supporting that service to continue to grow, to continue to develop. And the regulation also touches upon supporting people to obtain further qualifications to progress and to support the development of the service. Regulation 19, fit and proper person. And this is where you come into it as a fit and proper person, as a registered manager. This is your responsibility to ensure that you have got this in place. Again, it's making sure that you have fit and proper staff who are able to provide care and support appropriate to the role. Again, it's about the training, it's about the support, it's about the supervision sessions, it's about the team meetings, making sure that they are all documented and you are being a true leader. It's also about ensuring where you have volunteers, where you have contractors, making sure that they are fit and proper persons as well. They have the appropriate qualifications, they have the appropriate risk assessments to cover the work within your service. So it's making sure that you have absolutely everybody in place that is suitably qualified, suitably experienced and suitably trained to undertake the role that they need to. Now, CQC may come back and question you as a registered manager and the organisation itself if you have breached any one of these. So it's very, very important to make sure that you have all of the evidence needed for anybody within your service. Regulation 20, duty of candour. So again, the duty of candour is placed directly at the door of a registered manager. And it's about being open and transparent in all aspects of your service. It's about making sure that you are disclosing the correct information, you're reporting your incidents, you're safeguarding. It's making sure that you carry out your professional duties as a provider. Okay, and as it clearly says within the regulation, saying sorry is not admitting fault. It's about saying sorry that something has happened and you're going to seek to rectify that. Okay, so I agree with this regulation and the last aspect where it says saying sorry is always doing the right thing. Saying sorry isn't an admission of liability. It acknowledges that something could have gone better, and it's the first step to learning from what happened and preventing it reoccurring. So it's making sure that we are open, we are honest, we are transparent in all aspects of our care and support within the services. Now you've got the rest of the regulations, which I would suggest that you take a look at: your statement of purpose, your financial position, notification of absences, charges, deaths, making sure that you have all of that understanding there and you have that knowledge there as well. So please go over to the CQC website. Please ensure that you have all the information to hand, or at least you understand where to gather that information. As I said in the previous video, if you want to know more, if you want to have a more in-depth conversation, or you want to have a discussion that pertains to you as an individual and supports you as an individual to get through the interview, or just gives you a little bit more support and guidance in terms of being a registered manager, please get in touch via the website at www.calypsosolutions.co.uk. As always, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, take care.